smoker because prisons are filled with young black men found in possession of even a few ounces of marijuana. Where you live, armed police are a constant presence. You go through every day with the fear that one of your sons will be shot on his way home because he pulled a cell phone out of his pocket. And no one will be charged. Where you live, young black men are by definition trouble. Where you live, all drugs are considered criminal activity. Addiction in your community isn't considered a public health crisis or an existential identity crisis. No clinic is going to be built in your neighborhood. And if one of your sons is convicted for his small stash of pot and imprisoned, he's no longer eligible for food stamps, public housing, or student loans. He's forced to check a felon box when he applies for a job, which means he doesn't get hired. Having been in prison, he can be stopped and searched by police for any reason or no reason at all. And he can be returned to prison for the most minor of infractions. Because he's black, an ounce or two of marijuana means he is locked out of the mainstream society and economy for the rest of his life. Nor is it only your sons at risk. It's your daughters. It's yourselves. Women and girls of color are the fastest growing population within U.S. prisons, outpacing men by more than 50%. None of this is an accident. It's part of a strategy. It's a strategy developed in response to the gains made by blacks during the Civil Rights Movement. Just as the first Jim Crow was created in response to gains made by former enslaved people during Reconstruction. It's called the War on Drugs. And it's increased our incarcerated population from 500,000 in 1980 to over 2.5 million today. The war on drugs has been intentionally designed to maintain a new racial caste system without ever being accused of racism. Nixon's national domestic policy chief, said about the administration's position on black people, quote, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be black, but by getting the public to associate blacks with heroin and then criminalizing them heavily, we could disrupt their communities. Did we know we were lying? Of course we did," unquote. White people need to dare imagine the realities inhabited by people of color. Not only because this is the moral thing to do, but because we are, all of us, affected by racism. Institutional slavery stained our republic's founding, and systemic racism still saturates its soul. Slavery was, and still is, in its new form, a method of wealth creation. That's why racism and class hierarchy can't be separated. Enslaved people were the only property that propagated itself, producing more property, more enrichment, and that's why racism and sexism cannot be separated. Racism allows the 1% to deceive the white working class and poor people into believing that though they may be suffering, at least others are worse off. Racism is what keeps poor people and working class whites from aligning with blacks to identify and topple their common enemy. justice, the first memorial to the victims of lynching opened in Montgomery, Alabama. A white man was quoted as saying, "They should just get over slavery." But it's still with us in a variety of forms, both blatant and subtle. One new iteration is mass incarceration, rounding up people of color by the thousands for alleged acts that are virtually ignored if committed by whites. Erasing those who are incarcerated in perpetuity from the national discourse, making the incarcerated work for slave wages, manufacturing products for our biggest corporations, products that we buy without ever knowing where they came from. Building more prisons and filling them with black and brown people maintains the new racial caste system, all the while denying any of this is racist. We're told it creates jobs. We're told it stops crime. And it's easy for whites to believe that, and even easier for us to look away. But it doesn't stop crime. By shattering already fragile social networks, slicing apart families, and creating a permanent underclass of desperate, unemployable Americans, the war on drugs and mass incarceration actually have done more to create crime. We had to wage a civil war to end slavery. We had to forge a civil rights movement to end Jim Crow, at least formally. And now we have once and for all to end the war on drugs and the construction of new prisons. And we must not ever again permit the replacement of one racial caste system for another, no matter how well it's done. This will necessitate emptying the prisons of our own minds and treating and freeing the brave ideas and fresh solutions so long imprisoned there, and that's why I'm standing here with Patrisse Cullors. Part of my studying has brought me to her. You gotta read her book, I'm telling you. Patrisse is a performing artist, an organizer, founder of Dignity and Power Now, and co-founder of Black Lives Matter.
Has downplayed her contributions, but literally, Jane Fonda is the truth and the whole truth. So, every white woman in the audience, please take heed. I'm grateful to be here. Welcome to my city, y'all, Los Angeles. Every day. Nearly 2 decades ago, my older brother, Monty Cullors, was incarcerated by Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies at the Patrisse Detention Center, a county complex in Passaic. He emerged, in my family's estimation, a brutalized man. It changed Monty's life and our family forever. Certainly, it's one of the reasons I founded the advocacy group Dignity and Power Now and co-founded Black Lives Matter. It's also why this year I'm pushing to get a critical jail reform measure on the November ballot here in Los Angeles. Yes. Monty had just turned 20 and was already displaying signs of mental illness when In August 1999, he took our mother's car on a joyride in the San Fernando Valley. Teenage shit. After fleeing the police, he was arrested on charges of evading an officer. The mistreatment he remembers took place while he was awaiting trial. Monty was in a precarious mental state. He was diagnosed with schizoaffective and bipolar disorders while in jail. And while he was being transported after a psychiatric evaluation, he was beaten by 4 or 5 deputies. Monty was choked and he blacked out, and he awoke up in a pool of his own blood. Abusive treatment continued, and when my brother was moved to Twin Towers jail, he, and many people would say, was tortured. My brother was ultimately convicted of battery on an officer and the original charge of evading police and sentenced to 40 months in state prison. By the time he told the story of his treatment in jail to a lawyer, it was too late to sue. The devastating truth is that there are many Montys. People like John Horton, who died in a cell in solitary confinement in 2009. Officials said he committed suicide. His family maintains that he was bludgeoned to death. Or people like Juan Correa, who last fall was pepper sprayed after an altercation with another prisoner. And according to the authorities, he went into distress in the shower. Paramedics pronounced him dead. Because of neglect, betrayal, and brutalization like this, a coalition of advocates formed in 2011 to demand the fixing of LA County jails. We have made some headway, and in 2016, after 5 years of steady activism and 2 years after former LA Sheriff Lee Baca resigned amid a growing corruption scandal in the department, y'all remember that, we were able to establish the first ever Sheriff Civilian Oversight Commission. But there's more work to do. Correa's death last September was the second prisoner death in as many days. Only a few months earlier, 4 prisoners died over a 9-day period in LA jails. The Los Angeles County residents can help jumpstart another round of jail reform by supporting this proposed measure, the Reform LA Jails and Community Reinvestment Initiative. We are now gathering signatures here today in the lobby. Find us. If it's approved by voters, the ballot measure would accomplish several key things. It would give the Sheriff Civilian Oversight subpoena power, the power to bring in officers and their documents, the power to track what they've said, what they've done, to hold them accountable. The measure would also task the commission with developing a plan to reduce the jail population and reallocate the funds from jail budget to the community-based prevention that we need. It's been nearly 20 years since my brother was first arrested and our family was stripped of our dignity. It is difficult for Monty to hold down a job. He has to continue to struggle with mental illness and PTSD, and he is currently in a psychiatric facility. What might Monty or John or Juan's story be like had LA County invested in rehabilitation instead of jails and prisons? We won't ever know the answer, but we can make sure that the lives of others turn out differently. We can demand that families have their dignity, have respect, have care. And today, if you live in LA County and you're a voter, you can sign a petition that can get us to the ballot box on November 6th. Thank you so much.